It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying. By rayrae118. My Personal Redo, Chapter 5. Ginny folded up the letter she had received from Harry, thinking hard. So much had changed recently, and it all seemed to stem from one particular instant. Her decision to walk back up to Gryffindor Tower with Harry before leaving Hogwarts. Making that effort had shown her the boy behind the hero, and she was so thankful she had made it. She hated to remember her actions from the summer before her first year, when she couldn't even be in the same room as him, and she was very sorry that she had gone 2 years without ever really speaking to the older boy. Harry was a great guy, and she felt so much sorrow for the hand life had dealt him. Reading his latest letter sent threads of alarm and fear coursing through her. Hasn't broken anything? All right as it can be? Those were not the words of someone enjoying their holiday. She hoped McGonagall was really working on helping him. It sounded like he needed it. Darkness. That was the first thing Harry noticed when he came around. That didn't mean much to him, since it had been evening when he had lost consciousness. Groaning as he turned his head to the side, Harry tried to find some indicator of the time of day. Nothing was readily visible from his place on the floor, but he did notice that his door was still broken. The door was shut haphazardly, but the broken locks had splintered the frame. That would be useful, if he could manage to get himself up. He had promised Ginny that he would get out if things got worse, and this definitely counted. Harry hadn't lost consciousness in a beating since he was 9 years old, and he had forgotten how much he hated it, especially waking up and not knowing how much time he had lost. The house was silent, indicating the time to be in the very late evening, or perhaps early morning. Harry steeled himself, taking a deep breath and holding it as he tried to prepare to stand up. He made it into a sitting position, though it took a few minutes. His left wrist appeared to be at least fractured, perhaps broken. His left shoulder was aching horribly, and he felt that might have been the snap he had heard from his collarbone. His chest was throbbing from at least one broken rib, and his head was bounding, the room going in and out of focus as he caught his breath. Harry knew he needed to leave, but he wasn't sure how he would manage to carry his trunk. Using his uninjured right arm, Harry carefully pulled himself up to a standing position, using the bed for support. The only things he had in his room that he wanted were his wand and his arithmancy and ancient runes books. He grabbed the wand from its location under his pillow and glanced around to find the books. They were sitting on his dresser, next to a hairpin given to him by the Weasley twins with a wink and a grin last year, and his repaired alarm clock, showing the time to be shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning. Harry grabbed the books and the hairpin to use on the lock on the cupboard, and, as quietly as he was able, made his way out of the room. The stairs were an unpleasant experience, and he had to stop every few steps just to keep from crying out in pain. Eventually, he made it to the ground floor and paused for a few minutes, listening for any sign that the Dursleys had awoken. The house was silent, fortunately, and Harry wasted no more time in picking the lock on the cupboard that used to be his bedroom. He quietly opened his trunk and placed his books on top of the rather messy pile, before closing the lid once more. He looked at Hedwig's cage for a moment, before deciding that he really couldn't carry it and his trunk, considering he only really had one good hand. He was just glad that she was still out hunting or delivering letters, so he didn't have to worry about freeing her from this prison as well. His trunk liberated, it was time to depart. Pulling the luggage out of the house was a nerve-wracking experience. Harry was certain that, at any moment, Vernon would wake up and find him. No one came, however, and, soon enough, Harry was out of the house and making his way down Privet Drive. He wanted to get further away before calling the night bus. The slow walk gave him time to think, though it was a little hard to do so around the pain. Harry felt a strange sense of déjà vu as he sensed something watching him before he reached the end of the street. He turned from one side to the other, before smiling slightly as he saw a pair of eyes staring at him anxiously from a nearby hedge. He headed in that direction, hearing a faint growl as he passed under a streetlight, throwing his face into sharp relief. Harry grimaced, knowing he must look like a mess. When he was in the shadows by the hedge, he had seen the eyes. A ragged-looking man stepped out of the shrubbery. His hair was long and tangled. His grey eyes were haunted. But there was a kindness surrounding him that smoothed out any of the wildness. Sirius Black tried not to show his rage as he took in his godson's appearance. One eye was almost purple, and he wondered how the boy could see anything. His movements had been slow, indicating more injuries under the surface. The two studied each other for a few moments before Sirius broke the silence. "Merlin, pup, you're a sight for sore eyes." Harry gave a half snort, which he aborted in the middle as he felt the stab of pain to his chest. Sirius stepped forward in concern. "What happened?" he asked gently. The responding flinch was answer enough. Sirius remembered his own childhood with startling clarity. It really took an abused child to know an abused child. With a sigh, Sirius reached over to take Harry's trunk. "Come on," he said, deliberately not asking any more questions. He would get Harry somewhere safe, and then see about getting someone to heal him. Of course, he would have to think about just whom he could contact. Harry relinquished his trunk without any arguments, but seemed confused when Sirius held out his other arm for Harry to take. Sirius gave him a small smile. "I'm going to operate us somewhere safe, and then we'll see about getting you patched up." Harry nodded, exhausted, taking his godfather's arm. Sirius hesitated. "This will probably be a little uncomfortable," he admitted, peering at his godson in concern. "It won't help your injuries, but it's the fastest way of getting out of here, and it won't last long." Harry nodded again, gritting his teeth in preparation. "I'm ready," he said, clutching Sirius's arm even more tightly. Sirius nodded and took a moment to visualize his destination before he reached for the magic inside of him, turning slowly on the spot, and the two disappeared from Privet Drive. Harry gasped as he felt the peculiar and painful sensation of being squeezed through a very small tube. He supposed that without the broken bones, it might not be quite as agonizing, but he still wasn't looking forward to operating again anytime soon. When Harry got his breath back, he opened his eyes, taking in the gloomy surroundings. "Where are we?" he asked quietly, feeling like speaking any louder would break the uncertain calm. Sirius grimaced a little. "I grew up here," he admitted. "My parents weren't the greatest, and my entire family, with a few exceptions, were dark. I found out that I inherited the Black family fortune after my parents died 5 years ago. That includes the family home. I haven't been able to spend much time cleaning it out yet, so be careful. Don't touch anything unless I tell you it's alright." Harry nodded his understanding, and the two made their way inside number 12 Grimmauld Place. The inside was as gloomy as the outside suggested, and Harry stopped just inside the entrance, a little afraid to go any further, especially without more light. Sirius came up behind him and quietly ushered him further. He helped his godson up the stairs and down a hallway, stopping at one door in particular. "This is the only bedroom I've cleared yet. Everything inside should be safe, so let's get you settled." Harry just nodded, a little winded. It was getting harder and harder to breathe, which scared him a little. Sirius led him over to the bed, helping him to sit down, feeling a little alarm as he saw his godson holding in a wince, a brief flash of pain making his way across his face. He recognized that desire to not show weakness. He had been the same way growing up. It had taken James and Remus to get him to admit to what his parents were doing. And when he had finally run away at 16, showing up on James's doorstep in the middle of the night, his best friend had simply taken one look at him before dragging him into the house, showing him to his own, already set up bedroom, and basically informing him that it had been waiting for him for years. When Harry was leaning back against the pillows, Sirius had to pause to think. He had a few potions in the medicine cabinet, though they were mainly headache potions and pepper-up. There might be a pain reliever somewhere else in the bag, but he knew Harry needed a healer. The question was how to get to one when he was a wanted fugitive. Harry groaned and opened his eyes. They were slightly glazed over with pain, and, with alarm, Sirius realised he probably had a concussion. "It's going to be all right, Harry." He tried to sound reassuring. Harry started to nod, but stopped when the motion caused his head to pound. He coughed weakly. "Professor McGonagall!" He managed to get out around the burning in his chest. Sirius's questioning gaze caused him to elaborate. "She knows the truth, and she said she was working on getting me out. She said something about contacting Amelia Bones at the DMLE." Sirius nodded his understanding, his affection for his former head of house skyrocketing. At least someone had been trying to look out for his godson. There would be time later to get the whole story, but right now he needed to get Harry well. "I'll take care of it, Harry. You just rest, and I'll be right back." Harry inclined his head just once, and let his eyes slip closed, as Sirius hurriedly left the room. He made his way to the study, and pulled out a piece of parchment and a quill, quickly scribbling out a note for the head of Gryffindor. The question now was how to get in contact with the Transfiguration Professor. He could make a flu call, and hope she was in her office at 3 o'clock in the morning, but that seemed unlikely. If he had an owl, he could send her a note. Unfortunately, he didn't have an owl or the time to wait. That left one option. "Creature!" The old black family house elf popped into existence next to his master, muttering the whole time. Sirius grit his teeth at the insults coming out of the elf's mouth, but didn't comment. "Take this note to Minerva McGonagall. Tell her nothing beyond the fact that your master gave you the note to deliver, and then come right back here. Talk to no one else. Understand?" Creature nodded rebelliously.
"As master wishes," he grumbled.
Before he popped away, Sirius heard something along the lines of,
"Filthy blood traitor, master! What would my poor mistress say?"
before the house elf was gone. Sirius shook his head and headed down to the sitting room. Minerva would use the flue, so that was where he could meet her. He sank down into an armchair and thought about what had happened in the last few hours. He had felt both rage and fear, seeing Harry limping his way slowly down the street, dragging his trunk behind him. It had been too similar to the previous summer, though last year he hadn't had any injuries. Getting Harry back to Grimmauld Place had given him a purpose, and now all that he could do was wait for McGonagall. He was left with nothing but his own thoughts. He wondered what the Transfiguration Professor's role was in all of this. Harry seemed to believe that she was on their side, though he had a few questions about why the woman, whom he knew to be as close as a mother to James and Lily, wouldn't have kept an eye on her pseudo-grandson over the years. For that matter, he wondered what Dumbledore had to do with all of this. Amelia Bones's name was another shock to him. He remembered the woman from his brief stint in the Auras, along with James, before his incarceration. She had been a few years ahead of him, already a contender for the head of the Auras, when the current one moved on or retired. He had admired her quick wit and sharp temper. She always gave as good as she got. They had had a few flirty moments, in the hallways and across their desks, but nothing had ever come from it. Sirius had been a player, and Amelia Bones was dedicated to her job and not looking for a fling. He wondered how much time had changed her. He wondered if she had ever questioned his guilt. He had hoped that she might, knowing him the way she had, but apparently overwhelming evidence had swayed her from looking further. Not that he really blamed her. After all, Remus had made the same mistake, and Sirius had forgiven him easily. He would be a hypocrite to not give Amelia the same chance. The Floo roared to life at that moment, drawing Sirius out of his rather morose thoughts. He looked up to see a rather exhausted and worried Minerva McGonagall stumble out of the fireplace, her normal grace and poise gone at the thought of Harry in trouble. The note she had received had been rather vague. She looked around, eyes lighting on Sirius's lanky frame. The innocent convict looked rather worried himself, though she wasn't sure if it was because of her or for Harry. Mentally steeling herself, Minerva stepped forward, stopping unsurely. "Mr. Black," she began, stopping when she realized she didn't know what she was going to say. Sirius shook his head. He did understand, after all. "The evidence was all there, and I was a bit of a hothead," he admitted ruthfully. "I'm just glad that Harry believed me." Minerva nodded. She wasn't one for touchy-feely moments. There would be a time later to talk more. "Your note said that Harry was in trouble. Is he all right? What happened? Do I need to fetch him from his relatives?" Sirius was slightly surprised by the amount of fear he heard in her questions. The fact that she kept firing them off without waiting for a response also spoke to her panic. Oh yes, he and Minerva really needed to have a conversation later. "Harry's here," he informed the professor. He watched as she let out a shaky breath and collapsed onto the sofa. "What happened?" she almost whispered. She knew that he wouldn't have left his relative's house unless he had no other choice. He had known that she was working on it. She and Amelia were planning on meeting with Patricia the next day, and most likely going to collect Harry that day or the day after. Sirius let out an almost growl. "I received a letter from him yesterday that had me worried. I just wanted to see him, so that I would know that he was all right. I waited all day, but I couldn't get a glimpse, until about 2 o'clock this morning, when I saw him dragging his trunk down the street." Sirius broke off, looking down at his lap as he remembered his first glimpse of his godson. Half his face was bruised, and it looked like he was sporting some broken bones. I brought him here to decide what to do next. He told me to contact you. He needs a healer, Minerva. Badly." Minerva let out a muttered curse, her fear for the boy she would hopefully become responsible for soon skyrocketing. "Where is he now?" she asked, leaning forward. Sirius glanced towards the door. "He's upstairs in one of the bedrooms. 2nd floor, 3rd door on the right. I probably shouldn't have left him alone, since I'm sure he has a concussion, but I needed to contact you so that I could hopefully get a healer to patch him up." Minerva nodded her understanding. Her first instinct was to immediately rush to Harry's side, to assure herself that he was all right. But she knew that she had to do only what she could, and that was to get a healer to come and check his injuries. "Why don't you return to Harry then, and I'll see if I can get Poppy here." Sirius agreed, and left Minerva to contact the Hogwarts Mediwitch. He only hoped she would explain the whole situation properly before Poppy decided to curse the infamous murderer Black first and ask questions later. Harry was either asleep or unconscious when Sirius re-entered the room, but he didn't want to try and wake him up. wary of jostling any possible injuries. There was a single chair in the room, which Sirius dragged away from the rickety desk so that he could sit at Harry's side. He sank down into the chair and waited, trying to keep his mind from sinking back into his morose thoughts. It couldn't have been more than 15 minutes later, though it seemed much longer, when Minerva cautiously opened the door, leading a rather startled Poppy Pomfrey. When she had gone to bed that evening, she had in no way expected to be woken by a frantic Minerva McGonagall, imploring her to hurry, as Harry Potter was injured and needed her help. Poppy Pomfrey was not an idiot. She had seen more of Harry in her infirmary over the last 3 years than most other students. She had noticed several things that didn't add up. That boy was always too skinny. Every time she treated his injuries, he just seemed so detached. Even regrowing all the bones in his arm hadn't seemed to faze him. The story she was told about Sirius Black was almost incomprehensible, but she knew that Minerva would never tell her such a thing if it was untrue. She remembered Sirius quite well. He, Remus and James had been quite the troublemakers, though she had been quite fond of them. Not that she would ever tell them that. Both Sirius and James had projected a cocky, "I know exactly how good-looking I am, and I know exactly how to use it to my advantage" attitude, but every visit they made to Remus in the hospital wing after a full moon, she could see how much they cared. It had seemed so wrong that Sirius would betray his best friend, his brother, the way he had. She was glad to know that he hadn't, but horrified to realize that an innocent man had spent 12 years in Azkaban. She couldn't help but hope and pray that the prison hadn't dimmed his caring and passionate personality. He could be just what young Harry needed. Seeing the escaped convict now, looking so worried from his place by his godson's bedside, she knew that those two would be all right. They would be good for each other. Pulling herself out of her current thoughts, Poppy moved to the opposite side of the bed from Sirius, while Minerva moved around to stand next to her former student. Setting her bag down on the floor, Poppy palmed her wand and ran a simple diagnostic spell. What she learned nearly had her cursing. What on earth had happened in the last few days? Looking up at her audience, she took note of their worried expressions and almost smiled. She knew Minerva had her favourites, even if she didn't outwardly show them. And Harry Potter was definitely a favourite. She remembered a night almost 13 years ago, when the two of them had spent the evening at the Three Broomsticks, and, under the influence of too many drinks, Minerva had told her about Albus leaving the young Potter heir on the doorstep of his aunt and uncle's house in the middle of the night. She had listened to her long-time friend's concerns about the type of people those muggles were, and her grief that she couldn't give young Harry a proper home. Poppy sighed. "It's a good thing you got to him when you did," she informed them. Noting their startled looks, she informed them. She figured it might be what she had said, but her level of understanding may also play a role in their surprise. She shook her head, rummaging in her bag for a few potions as she elaborated. "I've had this boy as a patient quite often. Several things never added up. I'll need to do a deeper scan later, but for now I'll treat his immediate injuries. Mr. Potter is suffering from a concussion, fractured collarbone, 2 broken ribs, 1 cracked rib, and a fractured wrist." She saw their worry change to horror and hurried to assure them that he would be all right. "I don't foresee any complications, though I am beginning to think it might be best to get to work on some of the previously untreated injuries. He has had several broken ribs before, and that wrist has also been broken, as has his leg. None of them healed properly." Both Sirius and Minerva made noises reminiscent of their animagus forms, causing Poppy to lean back in surprise. She frowned, but continued. pulling out the potions she needed. I've got a few potions I can spell directly into his stomach. The concussion worries me, though fortunately there's no sign of any skull damage. I'll feel better when he wakes up, but perhaps it's for the best that he won't be conscious for me to heal his broken bones. Minerva and Sirius nodded their understanding and settled back to wait for the Mediwitch to work her own special brand of magic. The first thing she did was spell a sleep aid into Harry's stomach. It wasn't her first choice, but it would help if he could sleep through the worst of the healing process. With the concussion, there wasn't much she could do but wait for him to wake up. She wasn't too worried, though her readings did inform her of a rather sizable knot on the back of his head. She guessed he had hit it on something, perhaps the floor or a piece of furniture. She wished she could give him some pain relievers, but the Skelegro would render them useless. She decided that it would be much better to just get all the healing done now, rather than heal some injuries with spells, only to have to re-heal them later with Skelegro. The ribs would be tricky, and required her to set up a complicated spell to ensure that he would not suffocate from the removal of 5 of his ribs. First, she vanished the bones in his left wrist, before setting up the spell for both his ribcage and his collarbone, removing those bones as well. Once the Skelegro was in his stomach, she allowed herself to relax slightly, looking back up at her audience. She offered them a small smile to reassure them. He's going to be in a lot of pain when he wakes up, but the process should be mostly done by the time he does. I can't do much with the bruises, but I'll leave a balm for them. Twice a day, and they should clear up in a week or so. If you are planning on involving the DCW, I'd recommend taking photos of the injuries before the balm, for documentation. Minerva nodded her understanding, and made a note to speak with Sirius about getting Amelia bones here. Poppy packed up her bag and draped it over one shoulder. He should be fine for the next few hours, so I will return to school for the time being. I need to get a few things, but I will be back after breakfast. If he wakes up before I return, please contact me immediately. Minerva nodded again and walked her colleague back to the flue. When Sirius was alone with Harry, he slumped down in the chair, grasping his godson's hand as tightly as he dared. More than ever, he felt so guilty for going after the rat, and leaving Harry to this fate. How could he have been so stupid? Waiting for Minerva to return, he allowed himself to drown himself in his morose thoughts. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. I like that chapter because things are starting to get done. Harry's not great, but he's healing. They got Poppy there. The fact that she and Minerva both cared so much for the Marauders, it's very sweet. And them being so protective of this young man because of how much he's gone through. It's very powerful. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.